The Pakistan Army Act 1952 does contemplate that civilians can be tried by military courts. Section 21D of the Pakistan Army Act states that persons who are otherwise not subject to the Act can be made subject to it. This suggests that it applies to civilians, as civilians are otherwise not subject to the provisions of the Act, but are made subject to it by virtue of this section. Now, while military courts do have jurisdiction over civilians, this jurisdiction is not unlimited, and it is only for certain specific offences which have been identified. So, for instance, if a civilian is accused of inciting an army officer, of breaking their allegiance to the government, essentially of inciting mutiny, or if a civilian is accused of committing an offence under the Official Secrets Act in relation to any work of defence, military, air force establishment, etc. So the scope of offences for which civilians can be tried by military courts are very limited. However, there's also Supreme Court precedent, such as in the F.P. Ali case, where the Supreme Court has held that civilians can be tried by military courts. Now, in the 21st Amendment, the scope of jurisdiction for military courts was extended to various terrorist groups and terrorist organizations. However, these amendments had sunset clauses in them, and they've since lapsed. So this further limits the jurisdiction of military courts over civilians. And how do military courts essentially operate? In a general court martial, the individuals that preside over it, or essentially that judge it, are serving military officers, and the trial can take place at any place whatsoever, and even any appellate rights or any appeal is also heard by serving members of the army. And in any case, if it is found that a military court has exercised jurisdiction which it did not have, this can also be challenged in the High Courts of Pakistan. And in fact, the Peshawar High Court has set aside dozens of sentences which were handed down by military courts. So the courts do have jurisdiction to interfere where military courts are trying civilians. Recently, a lot of questions have been raised on civilians trying military courts, and this is particularly important in light of Article 10A of the Constitution, which guarantees a fair trial. And the way that military courts operate, the entire process is non-transparent, and it is dominated by mystery. And although there is not a lot of public information available about how these trials take place, there is information which suggests that in certain cases, the accused is not informed of the charges against them. An accused is denied of a right to counsel, and there's no reasoned judgment, and the decisions are non-speaking in many cases. And therefore, where the equivalent offences they're available in the criminal laws, civilians should not be subjected to military courts. And in the instant case where there are allegations of civilians attacking military installations and government buildings, there are equivalent offences in the Pakistan Penal Code about rioting and about attacking government buildings. So in this case, there are equivalent offences in the criminal laws, and therefore civilians should be tried in the ordinary courts of Pakistan.